I wish a very warm and good afternoon to all of you present in this webinar. On behalf of Diplomatist, I am delighted to welcome everyone to this very important dialogue on World Environment Day. This year's theme is biodiversity. My name is Kanchi Batra. I am the business editor at The Diplomatist. This is the very first webinar which The Diplomatist is organizing, and there are many more coming up starting next week. I will quickly give a brief overview of The Diplomatist. It is a monthly magazine focused on international relations and foreign affairs. I can proudly say Diplomatist has created a niche where there was none. We started in 1996. It is well known in diplomatic and corporate sectors. So the Diplomatist always strives to make a positive impact in communities where we live and work. I invite you all to connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube to stay engaged in our continued growth and collaboration. I would also like to encourage you to check our newly designed website. I hope you will enjoy the fresh look and feel of our updated website and find this portal serves as a valuable resource for you. So before we proceed to our conversation, I also wish to make an announcement, a very important announcement. Dr. Professor Bharti Chibbar has recently associated with The Diplomatist as our honorary academic advisor. Dr. Chibbar is teaching political science in University of Delhi, India for more than 16 years now. She has been honored with many awards and fellowships. She has published books and more than 250 research papers and articles in mainstream journals. She has also been invited to present papers in various national and international conferences and seminars in different parts of India and in many foreign countries, including China, Israel, Thailand, Bangladesh, Nepal, and UAE. Dr. Chibbar's specialization include international relations, foreign policy, Indian politics and thought, environmental issues, and gender discourse. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Chibbar. She has also agreed to moderate this webinar. Over to you, Professor Chibbar.
Well, thank you so much, Kanchi, for that generous introduction. And today, of course, I'm the host, so I think I should introduce our esteemed speakers today. And it's absolutely a pleasure to have Tanya and Hina, and that too at a very short notice. So, I mean, they have taken their time out because all I know, because of so many issues like, of course, COVID and also India-Australia summit, which was a very, very positive summit. All of us are occupied in our fields, So thank you to both our speakers for taking time out to join our one of the inaugural sessions. Well, basically, before I request our first speaker to speak, as Kanchi has explained, so we are starting this initiative of kind of a series of international webinars. And of course, we'll look forward to meeting you people again in few further webinars also. And today, as we have gathered here to celebrate World Environment Day, and I think this is one of the first World Environment Day which is kind of more online. Usually we used to have it offline in terms of plantation drives, and in terms of like last year we had this single-use plastic free as one of the areas. Last year it was air pollution. And this year, the theme is, of course, biodiversity. And just to give you a very quick background, I'm sure most of you know about it, but for our audience, it all started in 1972 rather, with the Stockholm Conference of the United Nations. And after that, from 1987, at the national level, individual countries also started celebrating this day. So it's more kind of a day to bring about awareness on the topical issues. And this year, of course, the issues of the biodiversity, because we are seeing that how animal, plant, and other species, they are being extinct, So I think it's a very, very critical issue that this year we are taking it up. So now I'll be requesting our first speaker. And before that, of course, I'll introduce, we have Tanya Spirbha. So it's a pleasure to have her here. And it's a great coincidence that I and Tanya, we share such deep interest in India-Australia relations in addition to environment. So it's absolutely a pleasure. Well, Tanya is a renowned and influential expert on Australia-India relations. And we love to have you, Tanya, again when we have a webinar on India-Australia relations. And
Sure.
well, yeah, and she has a particular interest in health and sustainable development, and she's also a career diplomat with the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for more than a decade. Well, she has also served from 2014 to 2017 at the Australian High Commission, New Delhi. And of course, she has specialized in technology diplomacy for inclusive sustainable development. She also has led the health agenda, resulting in the Australian and Indian Prime Ministers exchanging memorandum of understanding for health and medicine, paving the way for cooperation on digital health, as we had one agreement yesterday also in terms of cyber and technology cooperation. Well, apart from that, her other areas of interest include policy leadership in terms of smart cities and infrastructure, governance and investment. And previously, she also has dealt in the department, which include placements in Moscow and Baghdad. She has negotiated free trade agreements with a number of Asian partners, which is a very, very critical, I think, arena in terms of economic growth. And the countries include China, South Korea, and ASEAN. Again, it's a pure coincidence. When I was actually going through your absolutely wonderful bio note, Tanya, ASEAN is an area on which I have a PhD. So I think we have a lot more to talk about. Okay. And then, of course, she has led Australia's education agenda in the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation and represented Australia at the World Trade Organization on intellectual property and environment. And she was formerly a lawyer with Mincher Ellison, specializing in IP and technology. And most recently, she was head strategic international engagement at the University of New South Wales, Sydney. She is very passionate about Australia-India relationship, which we can actually see, and sustainable development. And she holds degrees in law, philosophy, and economics, in addition to being a career diplomat and director at the Australia India Institute, Delhi. And she also holds a Masters of Law from University of Melbourne in International Trade and Development. Very, 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 very influential, I would say, and very, 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 very beautiful, very, very passionate. I can say that Tanya is all about in terms of not only Australia-India relations, but also sustainable development. So we would love to hear you, Tanya, and as you previously told me that you'll be talking about sustainable planet. And the best part is that you actually has taken the holistic approach. That's what you shared with me. So I think that's very, very appropriate approach to take, especially in the contemporary times. So over to you, Tanya. We are all very eager to hear you.
So I'd like to start by reading out a poem that others might have seen already out. And it's called, Is 2020 Cancelled? So the reason I'm starting with this is to think about the type of year that we have had already. Many have joked on memes that 2020 has been cancelled and we need to start again next year. But this is just a short thought provoker. What if 2020 isn't cancelled? What if 2020 is the year we've been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so painful, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us to grow. A year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from our ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change, declare change, work for change, become the change. A year we finally band together instead of pushing each other further apart. 2020 isn't cancelled, but rather the most important year of them all. And this is by Leslie Dwight. So I start that really to provide a frame for what we're doing here today, because I think it's important to realize that we cannot work on any single issue if we really expect change. It needs to be holistic. So what I want to talk to you today about is sustainable planet, sustainability, holism, and cooperation. And then we can drill down into different issues from there. But the reason I start with that is because for me, in order to ensure that we protect and nurture the environment that we're all in, we need to embrace sustainability. But sustainability is beyond environment. In order to care about the environment, we need to appreciate each other as a society. We need to look at our fundamental values, and we need to develop an awareness of our unconscious bias that we're born into, and even from school, the type of competitiveness we're born into, the types of priorities and values that are instilled within us to perhaps earn money, to become successful, inverted commas, in a career, which might mean to progress and get promotions, rather than perhaps to be a good person, a good citizen, to connect to our fellow humans, but importantly, our fellow creatures. So even when we talk about an emerging change globally, that there's a shift for a new multilateralism, a need to relook at the global world order, the international organizations, even then, when we think we're being progressive, we use the phrase human-centric new multilateralism. But the problem with a human-centric new multilateralism, it's still positive, it's better than an economic one, but it's still constrained by this anthropocentric notion that humans are paramount. Now, most animal orders would look at their own species. I mean, that makes sense. I'm sure that most species don't even think about governing for other species. But human beings manage to augment the world in such a way that every other species is impacted on this planet. So we need to be mindful of that fact. We can't be exclusive of it. So what we noticed even in COVID-19, with COVID-19 this year, extraordinary things have happened. For the first time in our history, at least in our lives, human beings have faced lockdowns all over the world. Now, obviously, there are some social issues with that. We've seen some heavy impacts in India with the migrant workers, and there are many victims and things to take into consideration. But the fundamental premise I want to remind us of is that there's an anthropocentric reaction to this, which is everybody stay in your homes, given that if we have one, and stop working, stop polluting, wear masks. Now, again, we need to look at research about whether other animals can carry this particular virus, but something that this virus shares with climate change and other issues is that our response has been adaptive to the situation. We will try to mitigate, we will try and prevent its spread, but we have adapted to the situation by wearing masks and practicing social distancing. That is something other animals don't know to do, don't know how to do, and at a COVID situation, that might be appropriate. It might only be spreading at a human level, and Hannah would know more. But at a climate one, it is not appropriate. At a climate one, if we're wearing masks or having air filters in our homes, we are protecting human beings. When we talk about disaster resilient infrastructure, we are protecting human beings. When we think about ways in which we can adapt for temperature change, for cooler climates, hotter climates, warmer clothes, cooler clothes, whatever change we're talking about, it's adaptation. And adaptation is fundamentally selfish because it's taking for granted that the world will change according to the current behaviors and values we have, and that we can change along with it. But it is not at all taking into account other species, and we saw that most dramatically in Australia with the bushfires. There was human life lost, but also more than 1 million wildlife lost. Wildlife that we can't connect to or give emergency responses, or that you can't put something out on the internet to warn wildlife. In fact, the opposite. We have fences and things for farmers and the privatization of land, where animals also got stuck and weren't able to go to freedom. So we need to bear that in mind, that part of holism is understanding that this isn't just human species that is being impacted, it is the whole world, it is the environment, it is our ecosystem. So what is needed even at this sustainability level is a fundamental and economic shift, including on how we measure success. So this means fundamentally looking at our GDP at a global level. Obviously, Bhutan has developed the Gross National Happiness Index. There are other different creative measures by which one can measure happiness. China, interestingly, this year did not give a GDP target when Xi Jinping brought his Congress together. but more is needed. We need to look fundamentally at how the globe measures success. Because as long as we measure success by economic indicators, it is very difficult to encourage or influence behavior in any fundamental way other than focusing on those indicators. So when we look at G20 meetings, when we look at reform that is taking place among the international institutions right now, what should be paramount isn't only the global shift in powers, the global shift from the transatlantic and Pacific countries to the Indo-Pacific. It shouldn't just be about the composition of leadership in institutions, and it shouldn't just be about the values of balancing between Eastern and Western powers or Northern and Southern powers. It also needs to be about how can these indicators, these international institutions govern in a way that really ensures our future. And it's a 21st century preoccupation that, fortunately for us, the COVID crisis has actually brought into a focus. So we've talked a lot when we talk about environment, about climate change. And it seems that when we talk about climate change, it is difficult to talk about anything else other than carbon and carbon reduction and targets, so emissions targets. This is certainly a good place to start, and it is important, but it is necessary and far from sufficient. So I'm a big believer in India's approach to renewable energy, into the International Solar Alliance that India has formed, and we can talk about that a bit later when I discuss cooperation. But the point is, if we take a holistic approach, even about the environmental changes we want to affect with our policies, with our behaviours, with our cooperation, we need to be taking more seriously, not just the air pollution, but the water pollution and land pollution as well.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for that wonderful presentation. And I'll quickly introduce our next guest. We have with us Hina Dhawan. Well, she's a senior officer on special duty with the Chief Executive Officer, CEO, National Health Authority, Government of India. And she's been working there since 2018. In addition, she also holds the charge of Deputy General Manager at National Health Authority. Well, she is one of the core team members involved in designing policy and operations for Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which is one of the flagship yojanas that we have in terms of providing health, universal health to all. And it's world's largest government-funded health protection scheme, right from the announcement of the scheme in 2018. And it has been very successful also at ground. Well, she also has an experience of more than 11 years working with international development agencies as an expert on various topics related to health protection, health financing, and social security. She has been working very closely with the central and state governments in India and other countries on policy designing, operational implementation, and monitoring of large-scale programs on health protection and social security. So welcome, Hina. It's again our privilege to have you here. And Hina will be speaking on issues related to environment and health. So very eagerly, Hina, we're looking forward to hearing you. Over to you, Hina.
Thanks, Dr. Bharti, for the introduction and for the invite and the opportunity to be here. And thanks, Tanya, for setting the agenda and giving an overall perspective on how environment impacts our day-to-day life and what are the cooperation strategies that India and Australia can look at in that perspective. So going at the way how environment actually impacts health. So I won't preach to the choir here because I'm pretty sure that people here who are even listening in are attuned to the environmental challenges and how environment impacts the various areas where it coincides with them, health being one of the major factors. So health is just not impacted by the environment. Health is impacted by the food that we eat, the education that we get, the economic stability that our country or our economy offers, the social community structures which are there in the country, and of course the healthcare opportunities where a person can go and avail healthcare services and the broader framework for that. So just to give you an example, in terms of food, what we eat, what we drink, is it contaminated, is it toxic? is it pure, that greatly impacts on our well-being and our health in an overall perspective. On the education aspect, if we are educated, we'll probably follow better sanitation measures than the others, and our overall broader health will be in a better shape. And on the social community level, it really matters what is accepted in the society. Even though the literacy levels are increasing in India, and the hygiene habits are increasing, are on the rise, we still see that government has to issue guidelines and orders with respect to the current COVID scenario, that people should not spit, because spitting is considered normal in the Indian community structure. So the community setup matters a lot in how we behave, how we interact with the environment, and how it impacts our health going forward from there. So with that in mind, what happens is that our environmental hazards are leading to a shift in the nature of the diseases that India is grappling with. So India is still grappling with our communicable diseases, as Tanya rightly mentioned, about dengue and other diseases which are still prevalent, which are on account of our environmental aspects. But other than that, because of the food and the contamination and all that stuff, our burden of NCDs, the non-communicable diseases in the country, is rising greatly, and India is facing a double burden of disease. We are still grappling with the communicable ones, and the non-communicable ones are increasing, and not only in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas, where access to healthcare is still not complete. We still don't have tertiary care, high-end hospitals, super specialty hospitals to manage those kind of treatments. And that has led to a very high risk of cancer, heart diseases, asthma, and many other illnesses. So the air pollution in the country is not a unknown or a hidden aspect that from Indian people and international audience, that air pollution in India is rising, because industrialization is increasing, and so is the pollution as a byproduct. And as we are moving towards a faster economic growth, there are more cars on the road, which is not helping the environment at all, and including our exposure to air pollution and other aspects. So there's a much higher risk onto non-communicable diseases that the country is grappling with. And not just NCDs, the chronic respiratory illness, as Tanya rightly mentioned, that's on a rise in our country. Oncology, waterborne and vector-borne diseases, they're all impacting at the same time. And with the current COVID-19 situation, I'm sure a lot of epidemiologists will be looking at how it is impacting the mental health issues. Because it's great to see people without a mask on a webinar, but perhaps you would not want to do that with the house. So that's impacting the mental health and well-being of people. And mental health issues are still a taboo in our country. They're not openly communicated or addressed and even talked about. So that's another aspect which we may have to deal with after COVID-19. Really, we have to assess. So Ayushman Bharat has two pillars. One is the setting up of comprehensive primary healthcare centers, which are known as health and wellness centers across the country. So 150,000 such centers are being set up right now, which will ensure that we are finding these diseases much earlier than otherwise. So at a preventive stage, at a screening stage, so that we can start making an impact on a person's health much faster at a preliminary stage than a latter stage where curative care is only required. And the pillar that I represent is majorly dealing with secondary and tertiary inpatient care through empaneled public and private hospitals across the country. So as I mentioned that India has a federal structure, the scheme was launched in 2018, but the uptake largely depends on the states joining in at their own free will. So I'm happy to share that as on date, 32 states and union territories out of 36 states and union territories in the country are already implementing this scheme. And not only implementing, quite a few of them have expanded the scope of the scheme in their respective states and UTs. So just to give you a perspective, that the scheme initially was launched with a target of bottom of the pyramid to start with. It's an aspirational scheme. It plans to bring about the UHC agenda at the forefront. But to start with, in 2018, it started with 107 million families as the target, which covers about 540 million people in the country, which is roughly around 40% of the population of the country. But because the impact of the scheme was felt right in the beginning, and everybody felt that the rationale for the scheme to be there and for the purpose that it is launched is very apt in the Indian context, the states and union territories have expanded the scheme, and we have more than 1,300 families right now being served by the scheme in these 32 states and UTs alone. And a cover of about 500,000 rupees per annum per family is given to these families to manage the expenditure of inpatient care that they can take. The scheme is fully portable across the country, throughout the length and breadth of the country. So if I am a beneficiary who belongs to a southernmost state of the country, I can very well go and take treatment anywhere across the country. So this was brought about understanding that the Indian healthcare system is still inequitable, and the presence of bigger tertiary care centers is still not spread across the country. So if I want to avail a higher level oncology care, I should not be forced to not to avail it and be limited to a lower strata of a hospital at my own state. But I can very easily cross over and go to a neighboring state where probably a bigger healthcare center is there and I can take treatment. So that opportunity was given, and that's proving to be a boon in the current context of COVID-19, because as you may know already that perhaps about 30% of India's population is migratory in nature. So they travel from their home state, they go out for work. And now because of COVID-19 and the lockdown and the other issues that the country is facing, these people are trying to come back to their native areas. Or if they have any healthcare need while they are away from their home state, or if in transit, if they're traveling from one place to the other, this scheme is offering them complete care, because they can go to any empaneled hospital across the country and take treatment. So we've recently also included COVID-19 testing and treatment packages as part of the benefits which are available under the scheme, which were not there earlier. So that has been recently incorporated and it has been included. To give a perspective of how the scheme has grown, so we started on 23rd of September 2018. We've already empaneled more than 22,100 hospitals across the country. So the scheme is entitlement based. If your name is there in the list that is available with the government, you're entitled. You don't need to go and get enrolled. But we issue a verification e-card as an identity proof that yes, you're covered. Because in India, and I'm sure pretty much anywhere across the globe, anyone feels more empowered if they have something in their hand. I would feel empowered if I'm walking into a facility with something in my hand which proves my eligibility. So we've already touched about 12.5 crore such individuals, which is like 125 million people who've been already touched upon. We've provided more than 1 crore treatments in a short span of a year and a half that we have been in operation. So, which is a landmark which was celebrated recently, and the Honorable PM himself, he announced the achievement of this milestone, and he spoke to our 1 crore beneficiary on phone because he could not interact personally, which he usually does whenever he travels. So that is there. And as I mentioned that the environment is impacting the kind of diseases that we are grappling with. So just to give you a perspective on the 1 crore treatments or these treatments that we've done, 54% of these treatments have been for tertiary care, which is the higher end of care that is given out for non-communicable diseases, which are a direct, indirect outcome of environment or the food that we eat and our lifestyle disorders that are there. And to give you an example of the reach that has been expanded, 64% of these treatments have taken place in private hospitals. So private hospitals which were otherwise out of reach for these poorest of the poor and the most vulnerable population of our country, they are now getting this expanded access. So if I don't have a tertiary care hospital around me in my area, in my village, in my district, I can cross over, I can travel, and then I can avail that. That is there. And our top tertiary specialties, the treatments that we have given out, it includes cardiology, oncology, and medical and radiation oncology, and cardiothoracic surgeries. So which again reinforces the kind of support that the scheme is bringing about in terms of the environmental hazards and the non-communicable diseases which are in prevalence in the country.
Now, as I was just thinking that I'll share some of my views on single-use plastic-free India or the campaign. Well, basically, why single-use plastic-free campaign or the whole idea again got so important is also related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Because before this, there was a campaign, and India actually took, as Tanya also shared earlier, India actually took the lead, and also it got the Prime Minister Modi also got the highest environment award because he actually pledged in addition to the Solar Alliance that we will be a single-use plastic-free India by 2022. So, I mean, that shows the importance of the issue. And of course, we all know how our biodiversity, especially in the oceans, are actually becoming extinct. And one of the reasons is the plastic waste, because it's non-biodegradable. They get infected. I mean, it actually results in a lot of fatalities in terms of our species, oceans, especially if we talk about the oceans as such. And there have been a lot of United Nations and other reports which actually say that not only about the extinction of the biodiversity, but also the kind of huge waste it generates, and very little of that is actually recycled, So with this background, there was an initiative, and if you talk about India, I still remember the Prime Minister's flogging initiative of Mamlapuram. It actually took the whole nation, I mean, people actually followed that, and there was this whole campaign and initiative. We also had compulsory CSR in terms of actually using that for recycling or taking back campaign. But of late, what has happened during the COVID-19 is there is two things simultaneously happen. One is more use of single-use plastic in terms of gears for our frontline workers, in terms of masks, in terms of gloves, Also, you have these curtains, the hug curtains as they are called, So that means on the one hand, there's more use of this plastic, and which is the need of the time also if we talk about the doctors and others. And the second thing is many countries, many states, including New York and others, they actually you can say delayed the whole initiative of or the postpone the whole initiative of going single-use plastic in the near future, So in view of that, what can be done, So I think it's a kind of a collaborative affair, as Tanya also mentioned, and you also mentioned, that it has to be holistic and multidimensional. For example, of course, the governments, industries, we as civil society, people, NGOs, organizations, and the common masses. All of us have to pitch in, as stakeholders and do our bit, We should not just take it for granted. Okay, we need to have these single-use plastics, so we can just go ahead with using it and just postpone it for near future, because ultimately the kind of waste and the kind of fatalities that it will generate in future, which will be much more than the present crisis, the COVID crisis that we are facing. So there can be a couple of small suggestions which are doable, even in the COVID times. For example, when you go out and buy a grocery, why we need to take a plastic bag, because it has come back, in the market. We can take our own bags, and that will be much safer because our own bags. So in terms of COVID-19 also, in terms of threat perception also, or for that matter, we can use something which is recyclable, reusable, rather than just using it and throwing, The another thing which is very interesting, especially in the context of India, which I have felt, is something which is called behavioral economics, For example, I just shared about the Mamlapuram incident, People actually followed Prime Minister in doing that, in terms of having clean beaches or the ocean sides, not to throw waste in water bodies and all. So perhaps that can also be followed, we can have more such kind of initiatives where people's behavior actually gets changed. They can be continuous awareness campaigns, further advertisements, as we have for all other schemes. We also have National Marine Litter campaign, we also have Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. For example, it's such a successful abhiyan, to end the open defecation. So similarly, we can also have with the protection and with the need of the COVID-19, we can have such campaigns also to ensure that in near future, we do not actually double the problem with the use of single plastic, Thank you so much, Tanya. It's absolutely a pleasure. And Hina, both of you have taken your time out, and it was a very incisive and thought-provoking session. And of course, we had this wonderful all-women's team, always hardworking Linda and Kanchi. And before we wind up, we'll just take one more minute for a formal vote of thanks. I think Linda would like to give a formal vote of thanks.
I'm so pleased to have been given this opportunity to say thank you to one and all of our participants. Our speakers, illustrious speakers with their valuable information and enlightened perspective, to our audience who have been patient and attentive and have spared their time to be with us. We appreciate you joining us. Our co-host, the newest asset to the Diplomatis, Dr. Bharti, who's worked so much and so hard to put this whole discussion together. And of course, Kanchi, who runs Diplomatis single-handed. We don't do anything without her. All events, all our editions, everything is handled by Kanchi, and together they have put this together. I'm so very pleased that everyone has been here, and a very big and heartfelt thank you to all of you. May I wish you the rest of a good day. Thank you so much.